My name is Kevin Lombard. I'm a professor of horticulture, and I'm also the research director of the Agricultural Science Center at Farmington. And our Let me see if I can advance the slides here. Okay, so I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the Science Center Farmington. Can you raise your hands? Okay, well, we are we're actually located just a little bit south of Farmington, and we're uniquely located on the Navajo Nation, and our farm is actually kind of surrounded by the Navajo agricultural products industry farm. If you're familiar with that large enterprise, and we don't work for NAPI. They're partners, but if you we're open from 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday and open to the public. So if you have any questions on any of the research projects that we have going on or can navigate to our website, then we're happy to talk to you about a number of different research projects. So I guess the topic today that I'll focus in on is composting. And also, is there just a quick show of hands? How many of you all are actively composting? Raise your hands. I see one person. Anybody else?
How do I raise my hand?
And then just if folks, so there should be like a hand raise symbol down at the bottom of your screen for reactions. And also, feel free to interrupt me and to ask any questions. I kind of want to try to have this as interactive as possible. I see another couple of hands. So the kind of the concept of composting is essentially returning waste to back to the earth, and this is becoming a bit more relevant today. Like we saw a lot of increases in synthetic fertilizer prices, especially during and after COVID. And I'm starting to see kind of a renewed interest in composting at multiple scales, including from backyard garden all the way to municipalities. So I'm just going to kind of touch on all types of composting. So according to the U.S. the U the Environmental Protection Agency EPA, we're actually throwing quite a lot of waste to the landfills, and a lot of this waste can actively be composted. This is a source from their website on composting, and I've tried to tease out the pie chart here that a lot of, I mean, actually kind of sadly, I guess, a lot of food scraps get landfilled, um, yard trimmings, these components that go to landfills are easy to compost, and encourage you to compost these. Other types of items that can be composted are paper and paperboard. Like we often don't think about maybe shredded paper or some paper waste. I kind of have it as a um, you need to be careful what type of paper you're putting in a compost pile, but something to consider. And also wood waste, which is actually makes up a significant part of landfill waste. Sawdust. I wouldn't be composting kind of like particle boards, but solid wood and wood shavings and sawdust from solid wood. Um, I think it could be considered compostable. And so what about backyard compost? This is really easy for everyone to do. I think I know if you're like my family, I have two kids. We we have, we have like meals together, and in those meal preparations, we have like potato peelings or carrot peelings or some, other eggshells and whatnot. Those are really easy to put into a compost backyard uh, pile or system. And I sent this guide because I'm kind of going to touch on this from New Mexico State University guide H110, and I sent that to Michaela earlier, and hopefully we can get that distributed in the chat, or somehow I can get it emailed to you. It's also available for download. So what is composting? It's really speeding up the release of nutrients from organic material. It's speeding up the kind of natural life cycle of nutrient recycling, and taking those actions by consolidating and putting compostables into piles or into bins, and putting things under the right conditions with the right mix of compost materials. Then we can actually get microorganisms and insects and vertebrates to actually break those compostable products, food waste, scraps, down into a really nice organic material that can be returned back to the earth, returned back to gardens, returned back to ornamental plantings and flower gardens and whatnot. And according to the EPA, this is a little bit more dense definition of composting, but it's managed aerobic, which is basically referring to the introduction of oxygen into the decomposition process to speed the process up, and there might be introduction of microorganisms into the process. And it's also organic carbon-based materials like grass clippings, leaves, tree trimmings. If you're using tree trimmings, these are usually shredded. Food scraps I mentioned already, crop residues. So, a lot of processes that we do on our farms, like corn stalks and whatnot, those can be considered for composting. Um, Animal manures can and should be included in compost piles or compost operations. And biosolids, I'm going to talk a little bit about this towards the end of my presentation. Biosolids is just a really fancy word for human manure or human poop, and we don't often associate human manure as a source of compost. But I would like to challenge everyone by the end of my presentation to kind of keep an open mind. Um, I think it could be something important, especially if we live off grid or have the opportunity to, return waste back to the earth. By putting things in a pile and allowing this sort of sped process up, and by introducing oxygen, this is done by stirring or moving a compost pile around, we can get that organic matter to break down pretty quickly, and within about 6 months, we can go from the food scraps, which are on the right, to this really nice, rich, organically rich material that's our compost that can be returned back to the gardens or our farms. So, me being a scientist, I have to talk a little bit about nutrient recycling and what are we talking about. Plants are chemical feeders. They rely on nitrogen, pr primarily nitrogen, for the building of proteins and amino acids. And this is the largest, plants need nitrogen in the largest amounts. That's why it's called a macro element. And even though nitrogen is very abundant in our Earth's atmosphere, plants cannot readily absorb nitrogen from the atmospheric air. It has to be converted into a usable form, and that is either ammonia nitrate, which is NH4, or nitrate form of nitrogen, which is NO3. And these are broken down in compost through this composting process and made available to plants, plant roots. Plants can take up those nitrogen, that nitrogen, and use it for building its plant growth. So again, some additional sort of definitions of composting. This is a decomposition process and stabilization of organic debris. It's not a rot pile. So the um, the idea is to take food scraps, and this photo here on the top with all the pineapples and melons and peppers. This came from San Juan Regional Hospital, and that's just basically the equivalent of uh, a couple of days of what they throw away for food scraps, to give you an idea of like what institutional kitchens are potentially throwing to the landfill as a usable material to us. So for a while, we were working with San Juan Regional Hospital to bring the food scraps up to the Science Center and turn that into a compost material. And like my home generation of compost materials is much smaller than this, but it's really all about scale and what you have access to. And if you're interested and you have like maybe something larger than a backyard garden, and you're interested in maybe scaling up a compost operation, then I would encourage you to, talk to restaurants, talk to breweries, talk to institutional like school kitchens and colleges and hospitals, and sometimes they might be just really wanting to get rid of the material in a responsible way, and they'll just give it to you. So just throwing that out there. But by putting this in to a pile, usually, and stirring this, you're adding oxygen, so that starts to get the heat going. And if you have a compost pile like right now in the dead of winter and it's actively being maintained, you can go out there and see what like steam coming off of that. And I can see that off of my compost pile when I turn it this time of year at my own farm here. So what are the inputs to making a good compost? There's some confusion sometimes, or head scratching around this what idea of carbon and nitrogen ratios. But carbon is basically referring to raw organic materials like leaf matter, and nitrogen is referring to things that are found in like manure, or like poultry manures, cow manures, human manure. And you're taking this combination of this leafy matter, like yard waste, the leaves that drop off our trees in the fall, and you're adding in different ratios a nitrogen source that will help stimulate microorganisms. The microorganisms that are actively breaking down these food waste or scraps, they're chewing, they're needing nitrogen also, like plants. They need nitrogen to grow and be active. So you're feeding compost by adding this nitrogen source. One thing that often gets forgotten about, and especially in our arid climate here, is water. So adding water will help stimulate the process. It's providing a water source for microorganisms, and then that oxygen source is just you're stirring the compost, you're moving it around. If it's by hand with a shovel, or with a tractor, with a truck bucket, or in large municipal operations, they have specific equipment for doing that. But moving the compost around is really important to stimulate it. Otherwise, it will just kind of ruminate and go cold, and you won't have things start breaking down. So all of these ingredients here on the left, that turns into composted carbon. You have heat as things start to break down and microorganisms get active. You have water vapor, so you'll see that steam coming off in the morning if you're stirring, and you have a byproduct of carbon dioxide. Um, just showing this picture again. I think it's a kind of a beautiful picture, and it just highlights like everything that we can compost, and including like these melon rinds and whatnot. It's not a rot pile. It's not, you don't want to just throw things into a pile and just let it sit there. Otherwise, it's just gonna, you're gonna have a stinky, smelly mess. You're gonna attract animals, and that's kind of a downside. If you live in an area where you have like wild animals coming in, I have on my farm lots of wild turkeys. They like to come in and they like to scratch around my compost pile. In the past, you know, I think I have had deer out there scrounging around. So you don't want to just leave things sitting there. You want to make sure you're stirring things and moving it around, reshaping that pile on occasion. I do. I like to try to do my pile here on my farm probably ideally once a month if I can get to it. And I use my small tractor bucket to do that. It's a good form of exercise to use a shovel as well. Um, there's more care that must be exercised on what is thrown into the compost pile. Um, I've heard anecdotally or folks tell me not to throw meat scraps into a compost pile. I throw meat scraps in uh, because I hate to see like it go to the landfill. The only, I think the only issue would be attracting uh, wild animals or dogs to come in, and that's why stirring it and keeping things buried will help mitigate that. That heating process is also really important for killing pathogens. And this is especially important if you're using manures as your nitrogen source, because there are food safety considerations that need to be uh, considered. And that heating process will help kill or knock down the potential for any kind of foodborne um, pathogens. So let's talk a little bit about, are there any questions so far? Do I need to stop or, okay, I'll keep going then. So let's talk a little bit about carbon nitrogen, this concept of this ratio of carbon materials and nitrogen materials. And so low carbon to nitrogen ratio materials are things like grass clippings, food scraps, vegetable waste, coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are kind of popular for those that live in larger cities and have access to like a local cafe or a college cafeteria. You can ask them to save the coffee grounds, cow manure, horse manure, poultry manure. If you look on the right side here, these ratios are low. That means they have basically more nitrogen in them, and especially like things like horse manure or poultry manure, this lower the number, the more nitrogen it has in the material. Poultry manure is actually really a really good, nitrogen rich form of fertilizer in and of itself. And if you throw any of these types of manures onto a compost pile full of these high carbon nitrogen materials that have more carbon, like leaves, straw, corn stalks, paper, and sawdust. If like for us at our farm up in the science center, we have a lot of corn stalks laying around. If you're familiar with corn stalks, they don't break down very easily. So they're very high. They have a very high carbon ratio, which is this number on these numbers here, much higher than the low carbon nitrogen materials. So that's why you want to have a nice healthy mixture of these materials together. If you have too much of, say, like manure or grass clippings or food scraps, and not enough leaves or straw or corn stalk, then your compost might be stinky and and kind of smell like the manure. If you have too much leaves, straw, corn stalk, and not enough like a nitrogen source, it's just going to sit there and it will likely not break down very easily and take a long time to break down. So it's not, um, like I said, it's not like a heap where it's just staying in one place and not being moved around. Actively composting piles will look like this. This is a very healthy, um, active compost going on, compost process, seeing this steam coming off. That's showing that microorganisms are actively breaking down the organic material, and using the tractor bucket is pretty simple to move these smaller piles around like a small farm operation. This would this isn't my farm, but this is kind of what my piles look like on my farm. I failed to mention that I also have a 4 acre farm in Aztec where we grow cut flowers and vegetables. And so we're always generating like a lot of things for the farmers market that turn into scraps. And those go into our compost pile along with our kitchen scraps. And then, I have turkeys, so I'm occasionally adding my turkey poultry manure into the pile. And then I have a small tractor, just kind of like the one here. And it's real easy just get up there and move that around. A pile like this is not that difficult to move by hand with a shovel. Um, in a backyard setting, you're not going to have likely a pile this big, so that becomes even more manageable with just a shovel. And it's like I said, it's really good exercise also if you think about it like that in cardiovascular or whatever health. Some other examples of ways to use um, a mixing type of apparatus in your backyard, if you're in a backyard setting, is like a 55-gallon drum turned over on its side is really cheap and inexpensive. If you do use recycled 55-gallon drums, I would stay away from drums that have contained like oil or hydraulic fluid or any kind of synthetic or inorganic materials. Stay away from those because if you're wanting to introduce compost back to a garden, you don't want to accidentally contaminate your compost with something that inadvertently. Places where you can get 55-gallon drums. That are food grade might include like breweries or wineries or dialysis or clinics that have hospitals that have saline. Sometimes they'll just give you the drums for free or at a minimal cost. Like I know that at one time Wines of the San Juan here in San Juan County would have food grade containers, and they would they would at one time sell them for really cheap. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but it's something to consider. These are also commercially available where they're if you want to spend funds, you can get a commercial tumbler like this with a hand crank, and you're just basically cranking it, turning it over, maybe every other day or every third day, you might want to add a little water to the drum, close it up, turn it, and then let it sit, repeat. You don't want to get it waterlogged, but just adding a bit of water to keep it moist, keep things moist will speed that composting process up. Where I've seen these types of systems fail is either stuffing them too much and you stuff them full or you forget to add water. Um, and I also want to mention that I think if you're kind of doing composting year round, you're probably going to want to invest in a couple of these types of units, and then that's kind of why having like in this last slide a couple of piles. So you staggering the process, and you might have one pile that you start, and then you start a new pile 6 months later or a year later. If you keep adding compost to the same pile um, over and over, then you're going to have various stages of organic matter breakdown. So do consider having a couple of piles or a couple of these tumblers, so you can start one system, and then 6 months later you can start another, and then by the time you started your first batch, that's ready to throw in your garden, and then your second batch comes off 6 months later or a year later. Other ways of looking at composting is through bins. These are kind of common around greenhouse operations. This happens to be a photo from the Texas Tech uh, biology department greenhouse, and they were actively composting used potting soil that after the experiment had been done or whatnot. And as I mentioned, you can start these bins. There's three bins on the bottom, and this bottom example where you start with a fresh pile, and then you just kind of move everything over. And by the time you get all the way to the left, you have your finished product, and the bin on the right becomes empty, and you can start the whole process over again. There's lots of ideas on the internet. So just a simple Google search on composters, and it yields like a bunch of different homemade, like here's some made out of pallets. Here's a homemade one with a garbage can where you can go out there and physically rotate it. Here's one with a food grade 55-gallon drum. This one's also a food grade. Usually the food grade drums are blue. Here's something that's just wicker. Uh, Here's another one that has a three bin process. This person actually put looks like a lid on top. Maybe it's in more of a wintry area. Here's one out of milk crates. Some people make them out of hay bales. Like here's some that are wood used wine barrels, simple down to, you know, a tote that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. And you can have your compost. Some people will put compost under their sink. um, I'm not going to really talk about vermicomposting, but that's the addition of worms into the bin to help kind of speed up the process. In my compost pile at my farm here in Aztec, I actually noticed that when I turn it, I have lots of earthworms that come into the pile. They just kind of migrate in there. So it's Um, I don't know, they have a natural attraction to wanting to go in there and just start chewing on organic material. Um, this is what we would consider a larger scale type of machine for turning compost. And this is courtesy of the USDA photo shelter at their Beltsville Compost Research Center. Is actually a research center devoted for composting. And these machines will actually straddle windrows and turn the organic matter over regularly, and that you can see the steam behind it from that thermophilic process where the pile's starting to heat up from all the stirring the oxygen. There's water add. There might be a tank of water on the back of this that's spraying water over the windrow, and it's a very efficient, high-speed way of generating at a municipal compost scale. Composting can be turned into a tea. I don't have any experience with this, so I can't be. I'm just speaking hypothetically, but I know some researchers are actively experimenting with taking compost from their pile and then pitting it into a liquefied form, into injecting that or spraying that over crops as a form of organic fertilizer. So it's just another thing that you might want to, if you're interested in this, do a little bit of homework after the presentation today and see what you can come up with. The benefits of compost are studied in research, and I mean it's clearly evident from this research project. This happens to be a reclaimed site on mine reclamation, and these plots here have seen compost. These plots here have not. And so just the simple introduction of a bit of organic matter, even in our high elevation, semi-arid soils, desert soils, shows a lot of benefits. Just the introduction of organic matter. So, kind of in summary, a bit of summary on successful composting is you're reducing your debris size, and by meaning reduction of debris size, if you're using like yard waste and you're generating a lot of yard waste like branches, you might want to consider investing in a small scale wood chipper, and that'll help break twigs and branches down into really small, finer bits. Um, then you're adding nitrogen if your debris ratio is greater than 30. So if you have like a lot of leaves or a lot of corn stalks, then adding that poultry manure or cow manure will help bring that nitrogen in to start the process of decomposition. You're adding water. I can't overemphasize that in our semi-arid environment. So you don't want to have it wet, but you want to have it moist. So if you have your put your hand into your pile and you can squeeze water out, you probably have added a bit too much water, but um, it's just kind of a matter of experimentation for me. I noticed that when my compost pile dries out and I have forgotten or haven't gotten around to adding water, it becomes really hard to kind of wet it back up. Becomes kind of like a hydrophilic, meaning it just sheds the water right off of it. So, I might have to go get a lawn sprinkler and just let it kind of rain down on my pile to rehydrate it, or I might have to get like a garden hose and put it on low, or just maybe spray it down if it's a small like backyard scale, like just like a garden hose and a little bit of water, moisten it up. That really gets things going again. Um, you're doing a thorough mixing, so not layering, and that's why starting two piles instead of having just one pile, where if you have one pile, the tendency is just to layer things on top of one another. Whereas if you have the two piles, you can mix them and have them come off at different stages. That mixing part is really, I can't overemphasize that enough either, because you're needing that aeration to bring in oxygen to stimulate the decomposition process. According to Dr. Lindemann, he's a retired professor down in Las Cruces, soil scientist. According to him, you should mix every 2 to 3 days until the heating stops monthly. I get kind of lazy, so I go on mine. My pile's rather larger. I do it, once a month, or when I can get to it. I'm doing tractor operations. I'm doing some tillage or whatever. I go to my compost pile before I put my tractor away. I go turn my pile. It works. It works for me. It breaks down a little bit slower, but it's working for me. And I'll go and then add water after I mix it. Um, and then assuring that aeration. What are some common problems? Already touched on some of this. It's too dry or too wet. It's too wet. It goes anaerobic, meaning it becomes really stinky. Um, you're, you need to have a nitrogen source added. Your components are separate. They're not mixed up well. Your pile is too small, so you might want to go ahead and add up more material. And, I noticed that like with small piles around here during the winter time, that could become a little bit of a problem by getting the heat retention. So maybe the tumbler method might be a bit more ideal um, in a small batches. Yeah, the pile stinks. It's too wet. Um, the carbon air ratio is too low, so you have too much manure. You're getting that manure smell, and you haven't mixed very well. When compost is finished, it should smell very earthy. You can stick your hands in it. It's really just a satisfying feeling to me to have a finished compost and be able to smell it, and it has that earthy smell. It doesn't smell like manure. It doesn't smell like soil. So that's kind of when it's ready to put down on your garden. If you have like banana peels still showing or like a melon rind, then you need to let it compost more. There has been some work at NMSU on what's called the Johnson Su bioreactor compost, and I I've tried this at the Science Center. My experience with it has been mixed. The idea or concept is you have this like basically 6 foot tall, maybe 4 foot diameter cage with this landscape cloth surrounding it, and you kind of add leaves um, and debris in, and you kind of layer it in. It's more of a kind of a cold type of compost process, and I don't have enough experience with it. And what happened to ours was this black fabric kind of broke down in the sun, the high intensity sunlight. And so I pretty much have given up on it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try if you're interested in this. And there are some publications I think that are on the NMSU website. But it's just another type of compost. For me, I'm more familiar with the mixing type of compost process, and so that works for me. Everyone has a different style, so just wanted to throw this out. That's what the Johnson Sioux reactor looks like. It's basically put on a pallet and then um, with this fabric and the materials added on the top, and it's kind of layered in. The idea is that you're actually generating more of a fungal, like mycelia um, type of compost, and that in garden systems and farming systems, having a healthy fungal microbiome is very important. So I think it has its merits. I need myself personally a little bit more experience and understanding around it. But you may come across this also. In my own personal experience and research with compost is with on a more of a municipal scale with biosolids, which is basically humanure, composted humanure. And this was done. I just talk a little bit about my previous research on some tree plots at the Science Center. Those tree plots are still there. If you want to come up and look at them, they're like 120 feet tall now. These were after 2 years of growing. And I call it humanure a wasted opportunity because I think a lot of municipalities um, landfill or there's an opportunity that as we talk about sustainability, we also have to talk about what we do and flush down the toilet. And I think me personally, I believe that this is part of like a sustainability equation that d needs more research. And my hypothesis in these tree plots are having a problem with iron chlorosis, which is a nutrient deficiency, a micronutrient deficiency. And so my research started out in a greenhouse with different levels of or application rates of these composted biosolids. And this is what the iron chlorosis looks like. The the trees couldn't take up the iron because our soil pH is really high. Our soils in northwest New Mexico generally are on the alkaline side. They're neutral soils are 7, pH is 7, alkaline. Anything above 7 is considered alkaline. It's common for our soils, but this also presents issues for certain things like fruit trees and in this case these hybrid poplars. We were treating this condition with very expensive synthetic fertilizers, and so we came up with the idea of can we use composted biosolids as a organic way of alleviating this nutrient disorder. And just to show you what a municipal scale operation looks like, this is actually west of Albuquerque. It's still in operation. Albuquerque, they actually uniquely separate their waste stream. So everything that's considered light industry and residential gets put into one stream, and that like so everything is being flushed down the toilet or going into the sewer. That that gets streamed into the the biosolid and during in the wastewater treatment plant. Then the city of Albuquerque will take that sewage sludge and they'll bring it to this facility. They'll actually take one part of the sewage sludge that came from that wastewater treatment plant and they'll add in 3 parts of yard waste. So when you're people putting limbs by the road for collection once a month and leaves and lawn mowing clippings and whatnot, then that gets brought into this facility. They're mixed together, and the result is this really rich, uh, nutrient dense compost. The substitution of cow manure, poultry manure, or horse manure that I talked about earlier is actually the human manure. That's the only difference. So that's the nitrogen source to make the compost. Um, this is probably a little too dense or geeky, but I just wanted to point out our soils at the Science Center of Farmington is this is our the column right here, and then this is what the biosolids chemistry looked like. And I wanted to point out that any form of manure is going to add salt. So that's what this electrical conductivity EC stands for. I'm kind of drawing attention with the arrows, but you can see that the soil in and of itself is pretty low in salts, but when the biosolids in and of themselves are high in salts, but when you mix them at the appropriate loading rate and you add the compost to the soil, you're not dumping a lot of it on the soil, just adding a layer on top of the soil, a light layer, then you're actually cutting those salts down. Any manure is going to have salts. Poultry manure has a lot of salts. Cow manure has a lot of salts. Just wanted to point that out. The nitrogen here, the composted biosolids from Albuquerque, you can see they have a much higher nitrogen than just the soil itself. Phosphorus and potassium and these micronutrients, these are all needed by the plants. And any one of these that's not present will cause a nutrient deficiency in plants. So you can kind of see like even that composted biosolid has a lot of phosphorus in it, a lot of potassium. That's beneficial to our plants. What I was mainly interested at the time was this iron, which is Fe for short, and you can see the 420.3. It just contains a lot of iron, so it's a really good alternative to the expensive iron fertilizer that we were adding. Yeah, just kind of pointing that out. Um, when I when we did greenhouse studies, you can see just a 20 ton per acre rate of the compost added this much growth to our trees in the greenhouse compared to no addition. When I talk about 20 tons per acre, I'm really only talking about when you apply it to a field setting, it really is just a light layer. It's not very much at all. And then when you incorporate it, you almost can't even tell it's there. And this is what the tree plots look like in the plots. When we took some growth parameters, we measured the height, we measured diameter and whatnot. We found significant increases in the diameter of these trees after just a single 1 year application at a low rate of the application rate. This was a 10 ton per acre rate. So I just wanted to show, I have, being a scientist, I have to show you some bar charts, right? So I'll move on. Um, are there any questions so far?
Um, yes, Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, I have a question. I've noticed your trees. So my name is Shirley
yes.
Toth, okay? I'm from the Eastern Agency, and I'm really new at composting. And we started growing some willow trees. On the willow
Yeah.
trees, would I be using the same, like the same composting for just a regular plant?
I yeah,
I mean, for the willow trees, I use just the mulch is the only thing
um
I've used.
yeah, I mean you're adding organic matter with your mulch, and so the addition of compost, you might be adding a little bit more nitrogen in the breakdown of the compost. But with the addition of mulch, you're essentially adding that organic material. And you know, Eastern Agency is a lot like where we're at up in the Science Center, Farmington soils. They don't have a lot of, our soils don't typically have a lot of organic matter, generally 1% organic matter or less. And that's very typical for almost all of New Mexico. So any addition of like mulch or compost, you're going to bring up the organic material in the soil. And I always find that, especially with like newly establishing trees, and this can go for your willows or fruit trees, um, with little trees. Like you just get them, you're just planting them for the first year. The addition of organic matter will help hold water. It improves water retention in the soil. So it has that added benefit. And then you're also really, with new trees, you're wanting to kind of stimulate and try to get them established. You're kind of trying to baby them that first 1 or 2 years. And then after that, the roots are established. They typically start adapting and taking off. And you can add compost to established trees, or you can just leave them. I find the most benefit for me with my farm and my tree and my experience with tree planting is at the time of tree planting, I always add about one part, like let's say I do one part of my compost and then I do like 3 parts of the soil. When I dig it deeper and wider than the tree root ball itself. And I can do another talk at a future date on tree planting if you'd like.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
I would
um,
appreciate that.
yeah, and then I mix that up. I mix the soil with the compost and then I add it back into the hole and then I plant the tree into that. And I usually have really, yeah, I think it's really beneficial what you're doing. You're doing the same thing with mulch.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure. Anybody
Uh,
else have, oh, yeah, anybody
Kevin,
else have any questions?
so you
I
have
have a
to,
question.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Hi, my question is, you said to add manure, either poultry or I forget the other one, um, to the compost. So would that be aged manure or fresh manure?
That's a really good question. So I think in the composting process, you know, I haven't done any studies on it, but I usually add pretty fresh manure. Um,
Okay.
and I've also added kind of like poultry manure, my turkey manure. It might be like sitting out there dried out. Um, I'll add that in too. I think the most important thing with the addition of manure, and this comes into food safety issues, is that thermophilic process, the heating up process. So if you do add fresh manure, you're gonna want to make sure you're stirring it, you're adding water, you have it active, you see the steam coming off of it, and then over like a 6 month period, that you won't even see the manure anymore.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
so I I uh I think either or dried or or fresh works in a compost situation. If you're adding manure straight to a garden, okay, like you're not composting it, you're just adding it like you've scooped out your corral, you've got your sheep manure, and you're thinking about putting that straight directly onto your garden, you're going to want to let that cure or age, because fresh manure, what happens when you add fresh manure to soil is microorganisms become competitors for the same things that the plants are trying to take up, because that fresh manure is stimulating all these microorganisms. So you could actually be creating more issues by adding fresh manure to straight to the garden. So I always recommend that if you have like a sheep pen or a horse pen or a cow pen or whatever, let it, and you want to add it straight, go ahead and let it pile it up and let it age.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't
Okay.
tell you what the exact number of months that would look like, but it shouldn't smell like manure when you put it to your farm. It should smell earthy as a rule of thumb.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. We tried composting. It didn't work out because it just dried out and we weren't sure, but now I have a better idea. And also you mentioned about doing some fruit tree planting. That would be great too.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about setting something up in the future, maybe around the
Mm-hmm.
springtime when it starts to get a little bit warmer.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Th-
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe, for that.
Um,
Kevin, well, we can wait for the 2 questions you have in the chat box at the end, unless you
oh,
want.
okay. I didn't see it. Oh, yeah. I'll finish up here pretty quick.
Okay.
Um, so I wanted to talk about humanure, which is again kind of like a crazy um I don't know. I would I don't want to call it a passion, but I like and I don't want to promote anything either, but just for me personally, I think that, going and using composting toilets could be a part of the equation for sustainability. And I'm learning more about this even out here, that in Monument Valley, this is with Dr. Tommy Rock. He's doing some work out there with the project, and they're actually introducing some composting toilets now. So I think it's just another thing to maybe consider if you have the capacity. Um, you know, then we can talk later. But there are some I've I've had the privilege and fortunate to travel the world and work in the Peace Corps, and you know a lot of the world, actually use, compost, human manure. And there's actually, you can Google this in your spare time, but there's actually a World Toilet Day. So look that one up. Um, and there's some resources for this for the adventurous. So the Human Manure Handbook. Just wanted to throw those out. So in summary, composting will reduce landfill waste. It's a form of returning nutrients back to the earth instead of taking it to the landfill. There's different ways. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just a matter of, experimenting with everything. You start to fine tune your techniques over time and you reap the benefits and don't get frustrated if you know, I tell my students that you're going to kill more plants than you grow. And because I see some people get frustrated, like they think that they don't have a green thumb. That's not true. Everything comes with a bit of experimentation and just perseverance. I like to throw in if you're going to do edibles versus ornamentals. This kind of goes back to food safety, use of human manure, and for human manure, I feel like pitting human manure on like ornamentals, that's something that you're not going to eat, is really a safe space. And then you really probably should know more and invest more time in research for looking at that concept on edibles. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop my share, and I really appreciate your invitation today. And I'll see some questions in the chat, so I'll try to answer those. Can you mix food waste, clippings, etc., directly into veggie bed soil? That's a good question. I wouldn't recommend it because again, you're going to have to consider that that's going to have to break down first before it releases nutrients, and you might be tying up nutrients from microorganisms that are trying to break that directly into the soil. So I recommend composting it. One thing to be cautious about manure from livestock is be careful of pesticides that could have been used for hay and grass livestock consuming by the producers and herbicides as it could kill and stunt what you are trying to grow. Absolutely, that's an important consideration. There is one herbicide called Milestone that's it's I don't know how common it is. I don't grow pasture crops myself, but it can translocate into the be consumed and pooped out in the manure. And I have heard stories of uh, compost applied to gardens or manures applied to gardens with that may have an herbicide residual in it. So yes, absolutely, you need to be careful with that. If you are getting a source of manure from somebody else, make sure you ask them those kinds of questions like, hey, do you have any idea where this came from? Did you apply any herbicides to your field that you grazed the cattle on? That kind of thing. Ask lots of questions. And I would like to add that just because you buy compost from a nursery or someplace even reputable doesn't mean that the compost is safe. And I will say that I have purchased compost before and I ran heavy metal analysis on it and I found heavy metals in it. So that is probably a rare occurrence, but just because somebody's saying they have compost for sale doesn't necessarily mean it's absolutely safe. Um, yes, I agree with that statement about it could kill and stunt your plants you're trying to grow. Um, Manure had Johnson grass. So yeah, if you're looking at uh, a, like horse manure, maybe more susceptible than cow manure because of the ruminant. I'm not a livestock person, but horses being a single ruminant animal, if you look at the poop, it's more fibrous and less digested than, say, cow manure. You can get weed seeds in manure, and yes, you can spread those into your garden. So again, knowing what the source of the manure comes from. That's why I prefer to try to use my own manure because I know exactly where it came from, or trust the person that I'm getting it from. Do thermal composting kill the seeds from weeds and plants like Johnson grass? Good question. I have never studied that. I I don't have any data on that, so I'd have to look that one up. Um, I know that weed seeds can be quite robust, and once some of these nasty weeds like Johnson grass get into your garden, they become very difficult to get rid of. So, uh, again, exercise caution and just trust where you're getting manures from. Yeah, Johnson grass is a horrible, especially on farm. I absolutely agree. I came from Texas and Johnson grass was terrible there. One of the big weeds we have problems with is uh, sandbur. Sandbur is really bad. Any other questions?
Kevin, I have a question. Um, I think last year in spring when we started having chicks, bought some chicks from Tractor Supply. We've been applying pine shavings to their chicken coop. Is it okay to have those pine shavings in the compost?
Yeah, I think so. Like they're a solid wood source. They're shaved, so they're broken down, like shredded. So yeah, I would just add all of that um into the pile. I wouldn't try to separate it.
Okay. Let's see. And another thing, this is last year was actually my first time having a raised bed. Do you suggest that we or um take out because we're doing the hugelculture method? Do you think that we should take out all the compost and mix it with the compost that because the compost that we have, it's just been growing year after year. So now that I've heard you about the composting pile, I think it's best that we do another separate pile for this one. But do you believe that I should be taking out that compost? Because I've been hearing like there's nutrients in there, you want to keep it there. You can, do a top dressing of new compost and mix it up, or do we just take it all out in order for our, veggies to have healthier soil or healthier compost?
I would leave it. I would leave it and just, make sure you're mixing in whatever you're adding new into your garden bed. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, to me it's a little bit extra work to try to have to remove something. And I forgot to mention soil testing, something that I encourage everyone to do with their own garden soil. If you have never done a soil test, cooperative extension offices in McKinley and San Juan County can help. Same with the land grant offices in Saline or Crown Point, um, or private labs. Even a Nappy lab can help. The Nappy lab is a very useful place to drop soil. You won't get an interpretation like you would maybe from a private lab or a university lab. Um, I think like with everything in moderation, there can be also an over application of manures or compost. So, having kind of a healthy mix is always, I think, a good idea. Raised beds are a different type of growing system, and so uh, you tend to want to have like soil or a soil amendment that will let the water drain through it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, like just adding straight up soil will just make the water never kind of drain properly. So I think especially compost is especially useful in raised bed situations. I don't think I would worry about taking out any kind of old manure or compost.
Okay. Thank you. And we have another question on here. Can weeds be placed in compost pile?
Can you repeat that? Oh,
Can,
weeds.
yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. So my experience with that is depends on the weed. So if the weed doesn't have any seeds on it, it's just like vegetative material, um, and it's not bindweed, then you might be able to put it on a compost. But if it's like a weed that has seed pods on it, then no, I would not recommend putting it on a compost pile. In fact, my experience with that is separating out the noxious weeds and actually landfilling those. You don't want to get really bad weeds in your compost. So be careful with that one.
Okay. Any more questions from our audience tonight that would like to, you can open up your mic or you can insert them in the chat box. So we'll take a moment here, and if there's no other questions, then we'll go ahead and um, move forward. All right then. Okay. Oh, Alyssa, I did a soil test. My soil is salty. Thank you for the informational session. I look forward to another. Okay.
Glad anytime.
What are some benefits to starter plants? That will be our last question.
The benefits of starter plants are like we're going to start thinking about putting like seed in the greenhouse and starting our plants early so we can get a head start on the winter. And then when it becomes warm enough to plant, usually after Mother's Day around here, May 15th, we already have started those plants in the greenhouse, and then we can take them out after the last danger of frost and put them out to get a head start. And some other plants, vegetables, there's not an advantage to doing that and just planting directly seeded, like lettuce, kale, broccoli. Those do really well just by seed.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Bletch. I hope that answered your questions. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. And thank you again to our presenter tonight, Kevin, for hopping on here and providing a
Mm,
lot of information. So I really hope that we get to work here next year for maybe tree planting. So maybe that will be another topic that we can touch base on later on. But
okay, so
yeah, thank you so much. You're more than welcome to stick around. I am just going to go ahead and move forward with our upcoming events, but thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll share your publication with everyone on here as well.
yeah, and feel free to share my email address also.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. I'm going to share my screen right now. And Kevin, you're more than welcome to stick around, or you can go ahead and exit. I'll just be talking about some of the future events that we have. Okay, all right, that concludes our webinar for tonight. So thank you everyone for staying on here and learning about composting. I know that we're gearing up for this new year, and I know that composting can be stressful for some folks that are starting out. I myself, I am new to planting last year, so I'm just trying to learn as I go. So definitely thank you to Kevin, who is a really expert in this area, for his expertise and sharing his information with us. So a lot of great tips from tonight. So that concludes our webinar for tonight. What we have upcoming events for both in-person and webinar. We do have a livestock record keeping workshop that's taking place on January 22nd. This is a old flyer, so sorry everyone, we don't have an updated flyer yet, but it was supposed to be on January 16th of last week, or not last, this following week, but it has been pushed down to the 22nd on a Wednesday. So we'll be at Bocabato chapter and this one's going to be starting around about 10 a.m. and goes all the way to 12 p.m. So that's our in-person event. If you are, in the Shiprock area, that's where the Cloud Bateau is, not too far from it. And for those of you that are on here that are sheep producers, goat producers, we do have a lambing and kitting webinar. This one's just kind of a preparation for those nights that, for all of us that are wanting to have all of our sheep and goats to take care of their young, we always have that one doe that just decides, you know what, I'm going to take the year off. So you're more than welcome to babysit my kid. So there's always that chance. And you would want to know, what to do, what type of milk replacer you want to give to those lambs, to those kids as well, and so forth. Just, prepping you for this upcoming lambing and kidding season. So this is going to be presented by Dr. Ellison, and she is the Extension Range Livestock and Sheep Specialist from University of Idaho. So her presentation is going to be taking place on January 23rd, starting at 5:30 p.m. as such as all of our webinars. And you can head over to our website at nsa.nmsu.edu to go ahead and register for this webinar. And if you're using your laptop to access this presentation, definitely take out your phone and scan that QR code there, and it'll take you directly to our registration page. But that's all we have for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. And we do have the conservation planning program that I just briefly talked about from the very beginning. But this is something that we collaborated with Diné College Land Grant Office, and we provide assistance both in Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies. This is free of charge that we provide to all of our producers that are going through renewal process through BIA to get their grazing permit renewed. And one of the requirements is the updated conservation plans. So definitely we provide that assistance one-on-one, and we also provide informational workshops that are geared towards the BIA templates. So if you're interested in one of those areas, definitely reach out to our specialist, Ms. Shirley Toth, and her email is on there as well. But find us on Facebook. That's where we update all of our upcoming events. All our webinars are recorded and shared onto our YouTube channel, and we share our bi-monthly newsletters. So thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, and I hope you guys all have a good rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Have a
night.
good night.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so we'll go ahead and go straight into it. So what we are known as is Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. In short, we're pretty much called the NSA project, and our program is funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. So at NSA, our primary goal is to support producers by providing resources that will help improve their operations, profitability, and sustainability. And how we deliver that is with the help from our main project partners, and one of them is Diné College Land Grant Office, and another one of them is COPE, which stands for Community Outreach and Patient Empowerment. So you'll see a lot of their logos like you see down here below. COPE has their own logo, the Diné College Land Grant Office. And of course, we do get assistance from the main campus using some of their specialists as well. So we deliver in-person workshops and webinars, tailored to producers' needs based on the feedback that we gather from each session. So some of our recent workshops have included more of livestock record keeping. We do host livestock first aid training. That's pretty new that we provided back in 2023. As well as food preservations that we have done these past couple months and among other things. So we're pretty fortunate to partner with Dene College Land Grant Office, whom is one of our major project partners that I just mentioned a while ago that helps put these trainings together and workshops together as well. And as well as our NMSU CE specialist. And one of them that is pretty big is Dr. Marcy Ward, Dr. Gifford, and Dr. John Wenzel, who's the extension veterinarian specialist coming from the main campus that helps host the livestock first aid trainings. So they all play a crucial role in helping us develop these agricultural resources for our producers. Another essential goal of ours is to help increase producers' knowledge in a USDA program. So I'm pretty sure that all of you on here are aware of what NRCS stands for, FSA, RD, and RMA. So we do have a lot of producers out here that are pretty familiar with NRCS and FSA programs. A lot of them that are ranchers, apply for any drought loss assistance, or we have some farmers that apply for crop disaster assistance. So through our virtual resource fairs, we give USDA local field offices that platform to share their program details so ranchers and farmers can learn how to access and support that aligns with their needs. Another essential goal of ours, and we're pretty proud of this program, is called the Conservation Planning Program. That's in collaboration with, again, Dene College Land Grant Office. So our project resource specialist, Ms. Shirley Toth, and several of our resource technicians work with ranchers and farmers throughout the Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies. So we help them, grazing ranchers and farmers, how to build a conservation plan. But I can go ahead and talk more about that towards the end of our webinar tonight. Lastly, we focus on increasing our local food consumption and production in areas that we serve, and that will be McKinley, San Juan, and Cibola counties. So with our garden projects, we collaborate with experts from COPE, Land Grant, and also our trustees from New Mexico State University. So you might recognize some of their names from our virtual content, like Ms. Palmer from COPE, who provided lessons on food preservation and garden planning, and as well as the same topics from Dr. Walker from New Mexico State University. Overall, we are happy to share more in-person workshops, tailored to gardening and crops and much more. And we'd love to share, get your feedback actually from all of these sessions that we are providing to you guys every month. So that what gets us going in planning for, the upcoming months.